And now back to one of our top stories. Google services on Android devices and iPhones has been found to use to store user location data despite privacy settings. That was discovered during a probe conducted by Associated Press. And we're going to be discussing this live over the phone with Kevin Curran, a professor of cybersecurity, Faculty of Computing, Engineering and Built Environment, Ulster University. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor.
You're welcome, Angela.
So how big of a revelation is this? And is this really shocking now that we know, just recently about some of the practices that we've seen in other social media?
It's not that surprising in some ways that Google do have history in doing this, that in 2007, they were found to be tracking wireless access points when the Google streetcars were traveling around. Last year, we found that they were recording cell IDs from mobile masts when you're on your phone. And now we find that when you turn off location history in your phone, that it still actually records your location when you get weather updates on your app, or you even open Google Maps application on your phone, that it still records where you are, even though you may have gone into settings and explicitly turned off to stop tracking your location history.
And why are they doing this? What are your thoughts on what is behind it? I mean, is this to collect data that can be sold, to target us with advertising, or just to sell this information to commercial organizations?
It comes down to the advertising. Last quarter, Google had $32 billion in revenue. 90% of their income comes from advertising. So therefore, especially now that people are moving to mobile, it's harder, it's less expensive for people to actually buy ads in mobile. So Google don't make as much money. But what is very important for Google is that they have your location, because they provide a tool for advertisers which allows them to see demographics and to see regions and to be able to target people, especially within a particular region, and that allows them to make more money from their ads. So really, the more information, especially location, that Google have, the more ads, the more revenue they can make from ads. So really, it comes down to, they really do not want you to turn off your location history. That they'll tell you that it makes your ads more specific to you, that you get better services, and to a degree, that is true in many of the things. That when you type in "my car has broken down," it'll come up with mechanics in the region next to you because it knows where your location is. But really, the problem here is if you have a setting that allows you to turn off location history, and you find later that it doesn't do that, well then really they've got to be responsible about that, and they've got to be taken to task about that, and it's got to be more explicit, more visible, more obvious for users that when they turn off location history, that they believe it is turned off and that your phone is not being tracked.
Right. And can you tell us about what are the possible implications as far as misuse of this information? Could this actually put people into danger in certain situations?
I mean, it can to some degree. Some people have never probably gone into their timeline in Google, and it shows you where you have been. If you have it turned on, which most people do, you can see all your travels, where you were down to street level. You can see the photographs you've taken at that time. If you also go into My Activity on Google, you will see not only your search history, obviously, you will see the places you have been, the places you traveled, but it also shows, for instance, how many times you opened WhatsApp, how many times you opened any of the apps on your phone. It's got really detailed information there. So if people do get access to your My Activity and your Google service, you have really, really sensitive information that can fall into hands that you really do not want anyone to see, and it's really, really sensitive. And of course, there's a lot of people out there who do not want their location to be tracked, and that they have presumed by turning off location history that was the end of it. But then they find, obviously, this week, but the researchers in Princeton who discovered that actually it's not turned off, that many of the apps still record your information right down to street level. Well, then that can be scary for a lot of people.
Exactly, right. And now, is this similar for iOS and Android? Because Android is so much more dependent on Google as a service provider, whereas Google seems to be. I mean, is this Google itself, or is it Android and a lot of the Samsung and Chinese Android-based phones that use Google as their primary everything, really?
Yeah, it's a Google service which is doing this. So any Android phone, I mean, they all use the Google services. There's only a few that don't use it because they have to sign an agreement to use these services if they want to use Android. So the vast majority of phones out there all use the Google services, the Google apps like this. So therefore, it affects every single Android device. It also does affect you if you're on iOS. Of course, Google pay Apple a lot of money to have their services on the iOS platform. And again, this is a Google thing that will still track you there even if you have turned it off. So really, it's a Google feature that is not working as overtly as we thought it should work. It's not been as clear about it, especially when you turn it off. So it doesn't matter what phone you're on. If you're using a Google service, this is still tracking you.
Right. So what do you think the implications are for Google? I mean, are they going to get in trouble over this? Do we expect that there's going to be some lawsuits, that some countries are going to have stricter laws on this? What's going to happen? What are your thoughts?
Again, well, just there last month, Google were hit with the record-breaking $5 billion fine by the EU, the European Commission, for breaking antitrust laws, that the way they forced phone manufacturers to run particular versions of Android. And the European Commission found that this was unfair. It doesn't help competition. It doesn't help the market. So they were hit with this fine. So, of course, now lately, since May, we've had the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, which tries to prevent things like this and to hold companies to account. And therefore, I think that they will be hit by the regulators over this, and rightly so. I mean, because the GDPR is there to make it fairer for the ordinary consumer, that it holds the companies to account if they're doing things which are sneaky, if they're trying to push terms on us. And again, that we have this regulation now which really makes it, that forces companies to be fair, to be explicit about their terms and what they're doing, and to not have any sneaky practices.
Right. Is there anything that we as users can do to protect our privacy?
I mean, this is one aspect of privacy. Of course, privacy goes right across the board to what you share on social media, how much information you give away. Of course, you can go in, of course, and turn location history off by going into the Google account, going into web and activity, and turning that off. Now, that will affect some of the services you get. So it depends on whether you don't mind your location history being tracked, but at least in that case, you know it's being tracked. So for some people, it's just not an option to turn the location history off because the benefits outweigh the negatives. But what we want is whenever anyone does, and some people will really want their location history turned off for personal reasons, that what we want is when they do that, that all the Google services stop tracking and recording a person's location history.
Has Google come out and said anything about this? Are they going to stop doing that? I mean, I'm just wondering. I mean, technically, if they're still tracking even when we've turned off the option, do we need to talk to our phone manufacturers to make it possible to turn off the location option altogether so that it's not a Google function, or what do we need to do? Again, it's down to contacting your information commissioner in your country, whatever, and getting the regulators to do that. No, the phone manufacturers can't really deal with this because it's a service, really. It's too specific to a particular service, so they cannot. It has to be Google who have to agree to implement this function properly and to stop recording everything if someone has turned off the feature. Right. Well, definitely something to be aware of, and I guess we'll have to just, definitely be more aware of what's possibly going on. This could just be the tip of the iceberg, but thank you so much for joining us. I've been talking to Kevin Curran, Professor of Cybersecurity, Faculty of Computing Engineering and Built Environment, Ulster University.